important pieces of art of 2019, possibly even of the last decade. So he produced a piece of art which, well, it looked like this. Dale, if you want to pull up the next one. So those two people are not statues. Those are real people. They are taking a photo of his piece of art. Pull up the close-up of the piece of art. That's a real banana. That's not a sculpture. That's not made of clay or Play-Doh. That's a literal banana duct taped to a literal wall. Now, the artistic meaning behind it goes like this. The banana was his muse. You guys heard of the concept of a muse? That's a thing that inspires you, the thing that gets your creative energy flowing. And he was thinking about his next sculpture, and he was thinking about what type of shapes he might want to incorporate. So he thought, banana. Here we go. Fair enough. You've got to bear in mind, to get into this dude's, Maurizio Catalan's way of thinking, he was the guy who made a solid gold working toilet and put it in an art gallery just for the sake of it, just because you can make a solid gold toilet, allegedly. This is the type of guy that he is. So he plays with this idea, and he toys with this idea of a banana and shape, and what should I do with it? So as he traveled around the world for these various art exhibitions, he is really a big deal. Like, this might be a joke piece, but it really is a big deal. He taped a banana to his hotel wall everywhere he went, so that when he woke up, he would see this banana, he would go, okay, cool, what do I do with this artwork, what do I do? And then over time, a real banana, by the way, everywhere he went. I don't want to know what his banana budget was, but clearly far too much money. And he builds, over time, he decides, what can I do with this banana? So he builds one out of brass, and he builds one out of some kind of poly thing, I don't know what he even made, with some art substance. And he made all these bananas, and he was like, this is not really working for me, I don't get where it's going. So he decides, I know, let's just do an actual banana. So he did. And he added it to his, just to his artwork that was on display in this museum. Now, it goes one step further. This is not called banana on a wall. It's known as the comedian. And it plays on that old trope, you know, that old thing that you see in cartoons, if you watch cartoons growing up, the guy slipping on the banana and falling. That's kind of what he was getting behind this, because the whole idea of this artwork was, can I trick rich people into slipping on a banana peel and spending money on nonsense? So he put this artwork up for sale. Anyone want to have a guess at what it sold for? Sold 3 times. To the first 2 people for $120,000, or 1.7 million rand. It sold to a third person for $150,000, or 2.13 million rand. Now bear in mind that you can't actually buy the banana, because bananas go off. So what you're paying for is literally a piece of paper that said, I taped a banana to a wall, signed, for just over 1.7 million rand, and then just over 1.3. So maybe we didn't hear about Catalan, and maybe we didn't hear about the comedian. But did you perhaps hear about another dude by the name of David Datuna? Another artist involved in the same saga. He's the guy who did this. While it was on display, he walked up and ate the banana. Now, he called it a piece of performance art, and okay, fine, maybe it was, but it probably wasn't. The dude was probably just on a sugar low and needed some food. So he took it off the wall and ate it. And he says, I don't regret this in the least. So why am I telling you about Maurizio Catalan, and why am I telling you about David Datuna? I'm telling you about it because they were involved in one of the biggest art stories probably of the last decade, but we probably haven't heard of them. So what has this got to do with a Sunday morning sermon? And what has this got to do with a Bible study that's coming up from next week? Weirdly enough, it's got a lot to do with the Old Testament. And again, it's probably something that you haven't heard. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. Let me just hopefully get you involved in our study for the next few weeks. Starting next Sunday, we're going to be going back to a study I did at the back end of 2018, where we looked at those unusual Bible characters that you haven't heard of. You guys might remember it from I couldn't believe that it was well over a year ago. that we did this. We looked at people like Rhoda, the servant girl, who was so excited when Paul knocked on the door that she forgot to let him in. We looked at King Eglon, the guy who everyone thought was just taking a very long poo when actually he'd been murdered. We looked at him. We looked at those kind of characters that you might not recognize as you walk through the Bible. We looked at doubting Thomas, and we said perhaps he wasn't as much of a doubter as he's portrayed. Perhaps he was the type of character that just really needed more information to be convinced, and maybe some of us are like that. Maybe some of us just need that little bit more than the person sitting next to you. So I want to continue with that study starting next week. I've got 6 more characters that I want you to look at, including the Bible's first ever rock star. Just weird, unusual characters that you might not have come across. And to do that today, I want to introduce you to 2 characters in the Old Testament, characters that you've probably never heard of. And truth be told, until I started looking into the study, I hadn't heard of these guys either. So our study is going to be called Who? And then hopefully we can learn lessons from these characters and see what we can. Turn with me, if you will, to Exodus chapter 35. I'm not going to tell you exactly where yet because I don't want you to read ahead. But turn, if you will, to Exodus chapter 35. I've got the verses on the board, but if the text is too small, you can have it open in front of you. And it starts like this. Then Moses said to the Israelites, "See, the Lord has chosen Bezalel the son of Uri, the son of Hur, and the tribe of Judah, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom and understanding, with knowledge and all kinds of skills." Stop there. If you're reading this passage for the first time and you're trying to finish that sentence, what are we probably thinking about? Old Testament context. You may be thinking of someone who can interpret dreams, someone who has visions, someone who can address large crowds with a special speaking ability, a prophet perhaps who get messages direct from God. We expect these big, massive, grand gestures that you see in the Old Testament. You see people who get to walk directly with God. You see the burning bush, and you're thinking, if God is giving this guy, this Bezalel, the son of Uri, if he's giving him a special gift, if he's being filled with wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all kinds of skills, you're thinking, oh, he's a preacher. Oh, he's definitely going to lead the people out of trouble. Absolutely. This is the guy who's going to take the people back into God's fold. Let's see what he does. Then Moses said to the Israelites, "See, the Lord has chosen Bezalel the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge of all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, and to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of artistic crafts." He was an artist, a builder, a carpenter, woodworker, someone who could hammer in nails and screw in screws and put up poles, and this guy was a handyman. But we introed to him by saying that he's been filled with these amazing skills and talents and knowledge and understanding and gifts that come from directly from God to do a job that perhaps we don't think takes all the skill and understanding and wisdom and talent. Because we fall into this trap of thinking that it's only the high-profile skills and jobs that make a difference and matter. If you think about all the people who you would call the biggest influencers in your lives, they tend to be the people who are the most high-profile. They tend to be the people who are in the limelight, the people in the spotlight, the people where you go, "Oh, yeah, Matthew, I remember he did the thing." In the newsroom, you have your editors and your news editors and your rock star journalists who get all the attention. When they go on leave, life continues. Newspapers still get put out, news still gets printed, life happens. The editorial PA goes on leave, and the entire office falls apart. When phones ring and there's no one there to answer it, journalists throw toys out of cots faster than you can imagine. Journalists throw each other out of windows because of ringing phones. When we had a lady when I worked at the Mercury by the name of Gail Else. When Gail went on leave, everyone wanted to go on leave. You would literally time your leave with Gail's, because if she wasn't there, your life may as well be over, because your life was a misery. When you talk about the most important people in the newsroom, no one would mention Gail, because we tend to fall into this idea that special skill and wisdom and understanding, the type of stuff that Bezalel had, is reserved for high-profile, limelight jobs. It wasn't. He was an artist. He was good at building stuff. And amazingly, he had an apprentice. If you want to pick this up, the verse is on there, but it's the back end of Exodus chapter 35 and into 36. And it continues like this. He has given both him, that's Bezalel, and Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, the ability to teach others. He has filled them with skill to do all kind of work as engravers, designers, and embroiderers, in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine linen, and as weavers, all of them skilled workers and designers. So Bezalel, Oholiab, and every other skilled person to whom the Lord has given skill and ability to know how to carry out all the work of constructing the sanctuary are to do the work just as the Lord has commanded. You've got two people with skills that perhaps we don't always consider God-given. And the context of this passage is God is just telling them how to build the tabernacle. They're in the period of Exodus, they're in the period of wilderness wandering after being led out of Egypt by Moses, and they need a place to worship God, and they build this, want of a better word, portable temple, I suppose, you want to call it that, a pop-up church, a fold-up tent, basically. But not only did it have to be practical, it had to meet the standard of praising the Almighty. It couldn't just be a little bit of tarp hung over two sticks draped from a tree. That was not what it was supposed to be. To build something that was both functional and magnificent took skill. And if you have a look at some of the archaeological finds around that period, the level of artistic genius that happened could only have come the way that Exodus describes it. Wisdom, skill, knowledge, ability given directly by God. And in the case of Oholiab, the ability to teach that skill to others. And it is a remarkable piece of scripture that teaches us that we can't just focus on the stuff that is focused in the headlights. That's not what makes a church function. That is not what makes the kingdom of God grow. You know, we're extremely lucky in our case that Brian is also a skilled handyman. But if I was the full-time preacher for this congregation, you do not want me doing handiwork around this building. It will collapse on you. There will be a disaster. And because I'll probably be in the building, I won't even be the one to write about it, which will make me more sad. So you don't want me doing the handiwork. You just really don't. You don't want me leading the singing. You really, really don't want me leading the singing. Don't you want accountants doing the accounting? You want speakers doing the speaking. You want the friendly people doing the greeting at the door. You want your people with people. You don't want necessarily your introvert who's really good at admin being standing at the door and saying hello to people when they arrive. There's a story out of the Benoni congregation. I don't know if it's true. There's a part of me that I really hope it isn't, but it might be true. As the story goes, and it's from the late 80s, early 90s, and the story goes that they had the greeter at the door, and the greeter was, hello, how are you? And I'm good, how are you? How was your week? No, fine. Next person, no, how are you? No, it was fine. How was your week? No, it was fine. Next person, how are you? And the story goes that the one person asked, hey, how are you? How was your week? And said, it wasn't really great. My brother passed away. And the person apparently replied with, I'm so happy to hear that, Dad. Glad you could be here this week. Now, I know what it's like to go through the motions and to just expect the person's answer before they say it, but I can tell you right now that person was not a person who should have been with persons. But sometimes we tend to think that those limelight jobs are the ones that we should be striving for. That person's skills were not sitting in saying hello to people as they walked into a church building. That's not what they were good at. It happens in the workplace, and you might have seen this in your workplace. Someone is particularly good at some job, so they get promoted, but they're not good at the job that they've been promoted to. You see it all the time. When you're good at something, be good at something. And if you're lucky enough that you're good at multiple things, absolutely great, then do multiple things, but don't think that you have to strive for the stuff that's in the limelight because you think you have to be good at it. You don't. You have value, and your skills have value beyond the stuff that involves everyone seeing you. You want the sound guys doing sound. You want guys who are good with computers doing computers. You don't want someone who can't work their way through a smartphone doing the songs because the lyrics will be all over the place. You want people who are good at what they do to do those things. When we think about the heroes of the Old Testament, we think of Moses and Aaron and Elijah. We think of the prophets. We think of maybe the Levites. They were the priests. And we think, okay, cool, they're amazing. We think of Sarah. We think of Rahab. We think of all these people. But we probably haven't read the fact that Oholiab and Bezalel literally built the place of worship for God. They're characters that we just gloss over because perhaps their jobs aren't that glamorous. And because their jobs aren't glamorous, we think, okay, fine. And we move on. If everyone was a preacher, a church would simply not function. You need all the parts to make it work. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 4 to 8, so I've got the verse on the board if you want to follow. Romans chapter 12 puts it like this. Just as each of us has one body with many members, and those members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we who are many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts according to the grace given to us. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 18 to 22 puts it like this. So I've just got the first few verses, just 18 to 20, and there's one part I want to focus on as we go. First, I should have it up there. There we go. 1 Corinthians 12 from verse 18 says, "But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them. Every single person here has value. And just because your value might not be the one that you think you should have, it doesn't mean that it's invaluable. All the parts work. Every single one of them has a function. And God placed them like this. The verse continues, just as He wanted them. This is not what we want. This is what He wanted. If all were one part, where would we be? Think about that for the moment. Think about that for a second. If every single person sitting here this morning all had the same singular skill, how long would this congregation last? Probably because of its history, we might continue a few weeks or maybe a few months because we'd probably keep coming out of perhaps habit. But if all of us could only do one thing, there would be absolutely no rounded value. The church would crumble faster than we imagine it would. If every person had the same job, where would the church be? Verse 20 says, as it is, there are many parts making one body. Next week, Brian's going to launch the Vision 2020. There will be a place for every single person and every single skill as part of the vision of this church going forward. We've got a week. Work out what your skill is. Work out what value you can add, because you have value and your skill has value and your skill is important. You are valuable. The nice part about the story of Oholiab and Bezalel is if you go back to the story in Exodus chapter 36, you can see what happens if everyone pulls their part. I love stories that have an actual ending. A lot of these characters, as we work through the study, you'll realize it's like one sentence. This person did this. Then you have to search sources from out the Bible, and what does this say about this, and was there an archaeological find? Not this story. This story has a beginning and a middle, and quite nicely, it has an end. I've got it up on the board. It's Exodus chapter 36, from verse 4 to verse 7. So all the skilled craftsmen who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left their work and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than enough to do the work that the Lord commanded to be done. Then Moses gave an order, and they sent this word throughout the camp, no man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. And so the people were restrained from bringing more, because what they already had was more than enough to do the work. Isn't that what you want as a church? Isn't that what you should be doing? That everyone is pulling their weight so much that not only are you meeting your targets and your goals, you're exceeding them. And when you've exceeded them, you can take on a new project or set a new goal or set a new target. And if everyone's bringing everything, then you meet that goal and target and then set another one. And that's what happens when everyone does the work. Now, we might not have heard of Bezalel, we might not have heard of Oholiab, but there's a lesson in this that we can't afford to forget. And it's this: it doesn't matter what you're good at. The lesson we learn from them is that that thing is extremely valuable. And if you bring it to the table, that table overflows. And isn't that the point of what we do? To make God's table overflow. I really hope that you'll join me from next Sunday in the Bible study period. We've got 6 absolutely fascinating characters, and I really, really hope that you will join me